If we're talking Big 12 expansion wish list, we're talking Miami at number 1, and it's going to happen. This is Locked On Big 12.
You are Locked On Big 12, your daily podcast on the Big 12 Conference, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Happy Friday, everybody. Welcome to Locked On Big 12. I'm Drake Toll from America's number 1 Big 12 podcast, Locked On Big 12. Thanks for making this your first listen every single day. Today, let's talk with TJ Pittenger, expansion insider, about which teams are realistic from the ACC and why Miami is at the top of that list, how recruiting and expansion is going to change for the Big 12, as well as the possibility of a Big 12 ACC merger, and even a bit on Colorado and Deion Sanders changing the landscape of the league overall. But first, it's Miami, right? It has to be Miami if the Big 12 is going to become more profitable come 2029 when the look-in clause, the college football playoff, is afoot. Let's start there.
All right, a lot of ACC fans perceive their teams to be worthy of an SEC or a Big Ten invite, probably a lot more than the actual numbers justify. I've got Drake Toll from Locked On Big 12, and we're going to talk today about conference realignment from a little bit different perspective. But if you could tell maybe some of those fans of teams who maybe don't deserve to be in the Big Ten or the SEC, what is the conference realignment perspective from the Big 12's perspective right now?
Yeah, well, first and foremost, JT, if you're NC State, if you're Louisville, if you're Pitt, even if you're maybe Miami, who seems to be the bell cow of the Big 12, it's who they really want to go after. I want to start by saying I'm sorry. If your aspirations are to go to the Big Ten or to go to the SEC, and I would hope that those fan bases and those fans have enough wherewithal to know that that's not going to happen, that they do not, that the valuation of that university or a football program, and football is the one that pushes the needle here, is not going to be enough to push you over. If you are Duke, I've heard so many Duke fans that are screaming, this is it. We can get to the Big Ten because basketball is so good. And academically, we're so good. But it doesn't exactly work that way when football is bringing in the bulk of the money by a large margin, a margin large enough that no matter how good your basketball team is, if football is not picking up the slack consistently, you get left behind. And if you're a Big 12, you're Brett Yormark, you just added Utah, Colorado, Arizona, Arizona State. Those are the brands you want to stick around with. Each of them being better than the UCF, Cincinnati, Houston, BYU you brought in before. There's a new caliber of team coming into the Big 12, and the idea is not, hey, let's save Syracuse, let's save Boston College. The Big 12 is a business before it is a life raft. We're not just out here trying to save everybody in the Pac-12 or the ACC, and that's the reason the Washington State and Oregon State went away. There will be some Washington States and Oregon States in the ACC. And for those middle-of-the-pack teams, for your Louisville, for your Pitt, you best hope the Big 12 calls, because the SEC and the Big 10, they won't.
It's got to be the most disheartening for you. You mentioned them specifically, and I talked on your show about this. People can find your show at Locked On Big 12. I think Miami is deserving of a Big 2 invite. Even as a Florida State guy who gives them a really hard time, I do think they are. I think that brand is big enough. But to me, they would be the program that it would be the most disheartening. Now, Louisville, Pittsburgh, they got to realize they got to know, right? Like they got to realize it. But if Miami ends up there, maybe Virginia, those could, which I think Virginia goes Big 2 as well. Those would be the teams I think it would hurt the most. I don't think it's going to hurt Syracuse or Wake Forest or Georgia to end up in the. I think maybe some of those teams would be a blessing, but I don't think it's going to hurt Pittsburgh to end up there. I think it would hurt Miami pretty bad.
Miami is still the one that feels in the almost a college football purgatory. What do we do with you? And if we're having this conversation in even 2005, it's a no-brainer. Miami's in the Big 2. They're an SEC. They're a Big 10 team. And that's where Clemson feels like they are right now. Clemson won at the right time. 15 years ago, nobody cared about Clemson. Their athletic revenue was not great. Their football revenue was middle of the pack at best in the Power 5. Today, because of their college football playoff success, their valuation from the CFP has placed them in a position to go to the SEC of the Big 10. They are a Big 2 school. Miami's issue is their last 20 or so years have not been relevant enough. Not irrelevant altogether, but not relevant enough to warrant that call from the SEC or the Big 10, or to be at least a piece those two leagues are chomping at the bit to get. There is an aggressive approach from major conferences to get Florida State. That is a program that you want. That is a revenue stream, a fan base, a footprint that you want. It doesn't exist that way for Miami, and that's why I feel like as the SEC and Big Ten murmurs of them, who they value, what they value come out, they want regionality. They want the footprint. They want even the academic prowess, the AAU status of the Big Ten that a Virginia can give you. And if that is the case, they're going to put North Carolina and the Jordan Brand over Miami. They're going to put Virginia or maybe a Virginia Tech, if those two are looped together, over what they could get for Miami. And wasn't that case 20 years ago. But today, it's not how many games you win in football, how many games you lose, unless you're at the very top level like Clemson. And for Miami, they just don't have that enough to be desirable like they want.
Yeah, I think their market could help them. I think if, the Big Ten wanting to get into Florida could help Miami a lot. I think that I do think there's still a national brand, right? Like, and I don't mean to compare them to this team, but like there are Yankees fans everywhere. They're not that big, right? There are Cowboys fans everywhere, Lakers fans everywhere. And ironically, they all cheer for that team too. But I think that could help Miami, like the national brand, the location of Miami. But yeah, like they're an on the fence team. What teams right now, if the ACC collapsed, we've talked about some scenarios where the ACC could just fall off a cliff if a few teams bolt here soon. What teams outside of your Florida State, Clemson, obviously, would have an invite? What teams would have an automatic invite to the Big 12?
I still don't think that Virginia and North Carolina are on the table for the Big 12. I assume they will both have enough to get into the Big 10 and the SEC. Then again, we talked about legislation from the state level of will Virginia Tech and NC State have to follow? I believe the answer is no. In the same way that people always talk about, well, this team can't get into the Big 10. They don't have AAU distinction. Money will trump that in the end. If your athletic revenue is enough, it will trump any academic distinction to get into that conference. And if money is enough, it will trump the idea that NC State has to follow North Carolina. So I'm going to branch off Virginia Tech and NC State from their two major institutions and say that those two are pretty squarely in the list for the Big 12. The wish list certainly includes Louisville. When football is good at Louisville and basketball, no matter good or bad, is usually profitable with the best in the country, that is a very, very desirable athletic department. They can be top 25 in the country in total revenue or total budget any given year. The football is okay to good. They have become that because of what the ACC has given them in the last decade. Then there's Pitt. You have the regional rivalry with West Virginia. I still think they're on the low end of the list of what the Big 12 would want, but they're right there. I've heard Georgia Tech being another one that everybody's circled as, hey, this is a good Big 12 option because the likelihood of them getting into the Power 2 is not great. And again, the one that I circle, that the Big 12 circles, if Brett Yormark is going to close the gap between the Big 12 and the SEC and Big 10, Miami has to be in this conversation as a Big 12 school. If you can do that, if you can bring them in, if you can boost up Utah. Look, if Utah wins the college football playoff championship next season, the whole conversation changes. The PR that comes from that, much less the revenue that comes from that we saw from TCU even making it, is going to take this conference to the moon. So what you need is a competitive team like a Miami at their best in football to build back the gap, the bridge that has been constructed between the Big 12 and pretty much everybody else at the top. So there's your wish list. Miami being number one, Pitt, Georgia Tech there at the bottom, and your NC States, Virginia Techs, and specifically Louisville falling there in the middle.
How would additions of some of those ACC teams like NC State and North Carolina, Miami and South Florida, Virginia Tech up there near the DMV, Georgia Tech and Atlanta, how does that impact recruiting battles in some of those talent-rich states?
What's so interesting about that question is we don't know yet, and there's not a good enough way to know because of what we just learned about UCF. I was waiting to see, is a Power 4 distinction going to push UCF recruiting over the edge? And the answer was yes. They have recruited with some of the best in the Big 12. They've gone out and taken recruits away from schools like Florida, schools like Miami. And so if UCF can do that because of where they are in a conference position, could an NC State go win a battle against a UCF? That's a regional rivalry right there compared to where everybody else in the Big 12 is, kind of more in the heartland section of the country. Then you're asking Virginia Tech to go down to Florida and win some recruiting battles against UCF. I think more than anything, the Knights are chomping at the bit to bring in some of those East Coast teams and start building those battles. West Virginia is saying the same thing. Those two schools would value themselves over an NC State or Virginia Tech as of today in 2024. And so what you do create is a battle for the East Coast, but a battle that doesn't involve the SEC and the Big Ten, because if you look at just the brand itself, you have football players saying, I want to play in the SEC. I want to play in the SEC. Turning that down for an NC State because they're in the Big 12, I just don't know if we're ever going to see that.
Yeah. UCF is such an interesting one to me as a newer program that they've always been thought of as like the little brother. In fact, they were even behind USF at one point. Yeah. They said they won at the right time, but if conference realignment would have happened 10 years ago, it would have been USF when they were winning 10 plus games a year. That would be in the Big 12 now, but UCF is such an interesting one to me. Because of where they're located, man. And even if they're not able to recruit with the Florida States and the Floridas and the Miamis, if they can only pick off one from each of those classes every year, which they have, they're largely still recruiting the scraps or the leftovers. The leftovers in the state of Florida are still really freaking good, like really good. And they could be a force, I think, in the Big 12 for a long time. And so they're a very interesting kind of case study to me. They've done a good job at that group of 5 level, and now they've got that infusion of funds. They're the largest alumni base in the state, and they're growing that pretty rapidly with how massive of a university they are. They've got all the space and land in the world. And so they're younger, and so it's going to take time. I don't think they're going to win 3 national titles in the next 10 years or anything like that to catch up with the big dogs, but I think that they've got a really big chance there in the Big 12 to close that gap a little bit.
Well, look at Iowa State. Look at Kansas State, Manhattan, Kansas, Ames, Iowa. I'm from Jessup, Georgia. I'm a left tackle. I get an offer to go play in Orlando or in Ames, Iowa. And look, Ames, Iowa is a great college town if you like beer and the cold. But, buddy, I like palm trees and the sun. I can tell you where I'm going.
They got beer in Orlando, too.
They got beer. They got some harder stuff in Orlando for me if I really want it. So as from that perspective, and I know that's not, it's semantics that doesn't apply to every recruit. But for anybody that's in the Southeast, that's typically where you look. And we're still having conversations, college football coaches with recruits of, when can I play on TV? Do I get to play on TV every Saturday? Can my parents watch me? Are we going to play, if I'm from Georgia, could we play Georgia Tech? Could we play somewhere that's close enough that my extended family could come? Those questions are still happening in recruiting. It's not solely NIL. So with that, UCF has a distinct advantage over everybody else in the conference for being in Florida. There are multiple Big 12 teams in Texas that are all competing with each other. Baylor can't go into Houston's backyard anymore and take a recruit by saying, oh, there are no Power 5 teams here. That doesn't exist now. Houston's in the Big 12. Texas Tech out in Lubbock. They have to leave Lubbock because there are no football players there and go down to the DFW area and try to grab guys. They're constantly in battles with one another. At UCF, you say, hey, look, I can get you on ESPN every Saturday. You can come play in Florida. There's nobody else here in our we can go win the conference, have a locked ticket to the college football playoff, put you on the national stage, and try to win a national championship. Gus Malzahn has it as easy as anybody in the Big 12 from a recruiting standpoint. I think UCF's scary moving forward. Today's show is brought to you by Robinhood. Did you know that even if you have a 401k for retirement, you can still have an IRA? Robinhood has the only IRA that gives you a 3% boost on every dollar you contribute when you subscribe to Robinhood Gold. Get this. Now through April 30th, Robinhood is even boosting every single dollar you transfer in from other retirement accounts with a 3% match. That's right. No cap on the 3% match. Robinhood Gold words. Robinhood Gold gets you the most for your retirement thanks to their IRA with a 3% match. This offer is good through April 30th. Get started at Robinhood.com/boost. Subscription fees apply. And now for the legal info. Claim as of Q1 2024, validated by Radius Global Market Research. Here with Expansion Insider TJ Pittenger. Now let's go into the opportunity for the Big 12 and the ACC to merge. Is there any likelihood that's going to happen? Well, you find out here.
Could you see a scenario, back to conference realignment specifically, where the ACC and the Big 12 kind of join forces, and not just like we invite these 4 teams, more like they merge?
It's as likely as the Super Conference happening, and it's tough to say there's a number less than 0, but I wish there was to quantify this. There is no way. And maybe 2 years ago, when the Big 12 was truly desperate, but we're in an era now where Brett Yormark's the aggressor. If given the opportunity to either merge with a conference that we've seen has had either leadership issues currently or in the past that are enough to have the foundation of that league be so shaky that it's going to fall apart, that's desperation. Brett Yormark feels as though, hey, I don't need Boston College. I don't need, we talk about the market. Oh, well, what about the Boston? Nope. They're not profitable. I don't need Syracuse. I don't need Wake Forest. Why would we try to merge? Why would we create a 30-team Super League where we still got Cal and Stanford hanging out there and don't really know what to do with them? Yormark instead says, hey, these 4 teams are kind of in the middle zone here. I like Louisville. Let me take these guys and make us profitable, make us better, and no reason to try to save you, Jim Phillips, and wrap ourselves in what was supposed to be the greatest college basketball conference ever and ended up killing the league altogether.
How much of a reduced rate would those teams have to come in at if they did merge?
Dude, it makes me think of like an SMU. And I love going back to the SMU topic because it seems like from their administrative standpoint, even the last 2-3 decades, things have just been so discombobulated from a sports perspective. They said, hey, big middle finger to everybody in our conference. We're going to the ACC and we're going to pay for it. And the day they get there, you're like bags packed. They show up at the front door of the university and the dean comes out and is like, yeah, we're being audited. I think they're going to close down the university. How crazy is that? That SMU walks to the ACC and the second they get there, you talk about the conference falling apart altogether. So if that league is desperate enough that they would call SMU, who is desperate enough to pay its way for a decade in their conference, and now they're asking, hey, could you maybe save this team or that team? If you're looking at a Boston College, the reduced rate would be unreal. It wouldn't make sense for that program. And the reason I keep bringing up Boston College is they are so far behind a Washington State, who the Big 12 balked at, or right in that region of Oregon State, who the Big 12 balked at. So now Brett Yormark is being very selective. And if you get a Louisville, hello. They're an ESPN property that I believe the TV network will be able to work out with the conference. We can give them a full cut. For Syracuse, sorry, there's just no way. Yeah, it wouldn't make sense. Drake, where can people follow you? Where can they find your show? Locked On Big 12 at LOB12 on Twitter. Locked On Big 12 is wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube. It's kind of like Tiger in 05, like when the U.S. beat the Russians in the Olympics. It's like your first kiss every day, though, in podcast form. It's just the beauty of life in sports at Locked On Big 12. Love it. Thank you, man, for joining me. I appreciate it. Dude, an absolute pleasure. This whole expansion stuff. I do want to, before we close it out, it sucks, right? Like I know that I've made light a bit of a Syracuse or a Wake Forest. That really, as one of their fans, has got to suck to hear. Same it did for Washington State and Oregon State. But then again, in this world of college football where money is king, this has been happening to teams for decades, and it's part of the business. I think the intrigue of discussion of where we could go and where it could go for teams like Florida State or the ACC as a whole, I hope the best for you, but in capitalism and business, it just doesn't look. It looks bleak for some of these squads, and I'm sorry, it's a tough subject, but I'm glad we could talk about it together. Today's show is brought to you by our friends at Game Time. Game Time is the place to go when you need last-second tickets. You ever heard of a guy named Billy Strings? He's coming to town in a couple of weeks, and I really wanted to buy tickets to go see him here in Savannah. And I was like, they're kind of expensive. Luckily, with Game Time, those tickets drop with last-minute tickets, flash deals, zone deals. Easy to find and buy any concert ticket or any kind of event in your area, even the MLB. Views from all the seats in the venue, lowest price guaranteed, event cancellation protection, job loss protection. Right now, they have the flash deals make you save even more with exclusive in-app deals on select seats ahead of the game or the event. Game Time will always guarantee you the very best price as well. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices, and that's guaranteed. Colorado, Deion Sanders. I believe they're being undervalued by the rest of the country with one of the best quarterbacks in the nation. Let's talk about it. All right, it's his first year in the Big 12. It is Coach Prime, Deion Sanders, and the Colorado Buffaloes, and they took the country by storm last year. I don't know if that media hype is going to be quite this big this year, but they are in a bigger
conference right now, a conference that's still alive at this point. What are your expectations for Colorado this year in the Big 12?
I don't get paid to blow hot air up people's skirts. I know that Arizona State's going to be bad next year. I'll say it. That's fine. Like, why would you be so crass about a team in your conference at Locked On Big 12? I don't care. Colorado, I'm not trying to make a scene here, is going to a bowl game. And it's time to start telling your kids about 5-1, 4-1 Colorado going into their bye and being the talk of college football once again. They've revamped the offensive line. The defense is even crisper this year, especially in the secondary. Shedeur Sanders may be the best quarterback in the country. There are murmurs of him being on the cover of EA Sports college football game. You got to be a pretty damn good quarterback to get that distinction. So they've got the pieces there. Do I believe there's continuity enough in the offensive line to be elite? Absolutely not. But they've got the most talented roster in the Big 12. Their schedule early on, North Dakota State. Tough win, but a fun win. Nebraska. Matt Rule's the king of going 7-5 in his second season. They should win that one. I've got Colorado beating Baylor in a Big 12 conference game, as well as the Buffs beating Colorado State on the road. I see them on a hot start again. And like we saw with TCU last year, everybody in the world will talk about Deion Sanders, who is being underrated of all things going into 2024.
He come to Orlando, which is their stadium's about an hour and a half from me, and I am skipping the road trip to SMU to go to Orlando and see that because I got to go see it in person. So, and that's another winnable game early. Now, I think UCF is on the right track. I think they're going the right way. The bounce house gets crazy, but I mean they could win that one. They could win a lot of games early. It sets up well, and that's they played well down the stretch. They couldn't block a soul. They couldn't block near you. So if the offensive line is just marginally better, the talent around Shedeur is really good. And we know Shedeur is really, really a good quarterback who takes care of the ball. If the defense, which did play better down the stretch, they got some portal pieces, Okunlula. I think they can be, if they just are a little bit better. They finished the year, outside of the game that Shedeur got hurt in, that was just kind of a train wreck. They finished the year like losing a bunch of one-score games that they were really close in. If they can just be a little bit better. They remind me of a team that, are they going 12-0? Probably not, right? Can they get to 8 wins? Could they get to 9 wins? If they start out really hot at 4-1, 5-1, absolutely. I mean, and I don't know. You better not let them flirt with like 9-3 because that would be a team that the playoff committee would like to elevate into for ratings. And, I could certainly go on a tangent on what they will do for politics.
Have you seen the ratings? I mean, you look at any Pac-12 game last year, it's just, like the bar chart's great because Colorado is just doubling everybody when they play is appointment television. And again, look, North Dakota State, Nebraska, Colorado State, Baylor, UCF. 4-1 in that is not a lot to ask for. And when that happens, you turn on SportsCenter and it's Deion's face once again.
Yeah, 100%. The fever pitch will be all the way back. Again, doing it against the Big 12 now, although the Pac-12 had a good year last year, but I think you kind of knew like it was on its way out. And like I said, don't let him be around 9-3 because I think the playoff committee, I obviously have my opinions about them being political because of who I cheer for. But yeah, I think there's a good chance that they would try their best to sneak him in. All right, let's say he does go off and have a really good year and 8-win, 9-win year. Is he in the Big 12 the year after that? Does somebody in the Power 2 come snatch him pretty quickly?
I think that Shedeur, if it solely depends on his son. I mean, we've seen that he wants to coach Shedeur wherever Shedeur goes. That has been the roadmap in essence for Deion. And the conversations of, can he stick it out for a few years at Colorado and build them into a national powerhouse? I'm not sure if he's interested or invested in that because he doesn't have to be. This isn't a like Willie Fritz. If you hire Willie Fritz to your program, he's got to go prove it. Deion doesn't. In a 4-8 campaign, we were still only talking about Deion. So does he need to stay at Colorado? No. And I can only imagine that every Power 2 school that has the means to do so will be throwing buckets of money to bring Deion Sanders in. It makes me think if Arkansas fires Sam Pittman next year, very likely, to have John Calipari in basketball and Deion Sanders in football. You're telling me the guys at Tyson and Walmart and JB Hunt won't be just drooling over that? I don't think Deion Sanders is. I will give you all your roses for 2024, but I don't see him being in the Big 12 in 2025.
My goodness.
Dude, you just chills thinking about it.
And obviously that's like shocking news, but I hadn't really thought of that yet. But yeah, Sam Pittman should have gotten fired last year.
Right.
If that comes open, Deion in the SEC would be, oh my goodness. I'm like getting goosebumps. Like up and
in Arkansas, too. It's one of those schools that's got kind of a moxie to it. They've got some flash on the national scale. Right. Blue collar still. They got a beautiful mixture of those two things and a ton of Texas kids that go there. Just a Saturday in Fayetteville where the football team plays at 11, basketball team plays at 7. Whoa. Fire those folks up.
Shador Heisman chances is all just kind of come down to them winning because he's going to get more hype than everyone else. And Jaden Daniels just won it at 9-3.
Right. Look at like a Robert Griffin III when he won it at Baylor, and I think they went to the Alamo Bowl. It could be one of those scenarios. The only problem is you look at the quarterback like a Jackson Dart. I wouldn't be shocked if he just comes out and has an unreal season with Lane Kiffin.
11-1.
There are too many really good quarterbacks. This is a great quarterback class across the country. And I think there are 10 different guys that you kind of look over and think, oh, well, that guy could do, Kansas or Washington State or, Cam Rising still hanging around here. So I'm not sure we can buy into it yet, but there's no reason he shouldn't go to New York. There's no reason with that talent and in the Big 12 that he shouldn't be in New York.
Yeah, put up a lot of points, have a lot of fun with it.
Yeah.
Drake, I appreciate you for joining us quickly. Where can people find your work, follow you for more, not only Colorado, but all of the Big 12 content?
Locked On Big 12 at LOB12 on Twitter or wherever you get your podcast, and specifically on YouTube. Every day we're talking Big 12 action, expansion, specifically expansion right now, as well as spring football. Locked On Big 12. That was an invigorating conversation with TJ Pittenger, who I like a lot. Come back on Monday. This has been Low as Will Be. Locked On. Thanks for making it your first listen every single day. Dose Grande.